Every autumn, backyard gardeners across this country haul branches to the curb or strike a match to a pile that could have been feeding their soil for the next 2 decades. Free water, free fertility, free heat, all of it converted to ash and smoke in a single afternoon. Meanwhile, on a mountain farm in the Austrian Alps, a man who was fined more times than he could count for doing something the authorities called reckless was growing lemons in the snow. He never bought a bag of fertilizer, he never ran a hose, and he buried rotten wood in mounds, covered it with soil, and let it work. 20 years later, those mounds were still producing harvests that neighbors who followed every rule could not explain and could not match. What he understood, and what most of us were never taught, is that dead wood is not waste. It is a sponge, a slow-release fertilizer, and a furnace all pressed into the earth and working on a timescale that outlasts the gardener who built it. And what I want to show you today is not just how this man's farm worked, it is why the physics and biology behind it make this one of the most practical, most neglected ideas in all of gardening. Sepp Holzer did not set out to become the most fine farmer in Austria. He set out to grow food on steep alpine slopes in a climate that should have made it impossible, following what the land told him, rather than what the rule book said. In the 1980s, agricultural inspectors arrived at his farm in Lungau with clipboards and violation notices for mounds of buried wood, for unauthorized ponds, for terraces on slopes the authorities considered reckless. His neighbors farmed flat fields and followed the rules. Holzer built hills from rotting logs and planted citrus, kiwi, and grapes on ground where only grass and spruce had survived. Each harvest season, the inspectors returned. Each season, the evidence in the fields was harder to argue with. By the early 1990s, the Agricultural Board threatened to seize his property. His response was to invite them for a walk through the terraces, to let them pick a lemon from a tree growing at altitude in the Alps, to run their hands through soil that had not been irrigated or fertilized in years. The fines continued, but the yields kept speaking louder. What Holzer had built on those slopes is now known in permaculture circles as hugelkultur, which translates simply as hill culture. The technique is older than Holzer, older than permaculture as a discipline, but he is the person most responsible for demonstrating it at a scale and in a climate dramatic enough to force the gardening world to pay attention. The core principle is straightforward, almost to the deft point of seeming too simple. You bury wood in the ground, mound soil over it, and plant into the mound. That is the whole idea. What happens over the following years inside that mound, however, is anything but simple. And understanding it changes how you think about soil, water, and fertility permanently. The first thing buried wood does is hold water at a scale that becomes genuinely difficult to believe until you measure it. Wood is not a solid material. At the cellular level, it is a dense network of channels and chambers built by the tree to move water from roots to canopy. When a tree falls and begins to decay, those channels do not disappear immediately, they open. Fungi and bacteria break down the walls between chambers, and the wood becomes progressively more porous, a three-dimensional sponge built from lignin and cellulose. In laboratory measurements, heavily decomposed pine logs have absorbed water equal to 5 times their dry weight. Oak, which decays more slowly, still triples its mass with moisture. You can take a piece of wood that has been rotting in the forest for several years, squeeze it between your hands, and water will run out of it. And that same piece of wood buried 3 feet below your garden surface is doing exactly that work, silently, invisibly, continuously, releasing moisture upward to roots during dry weeks and recharging itself during every rain. Field measurements from hugelkultur beds in practice reflect this physics precisely. Moisture probes driven into the heart of a mature mound during mid-July drought conditions regularly show 40 to 60% soil moisture, while the topsoil directly above cracks in the sun and neighboring flatbeds require daily watering to survive. The buried reservoir does not discriminate between crops. Whatever is planted above it draws on the same deep moisture supply regardless of how long the surface remains dry. Gardeners who build their first mound and return the following summer expecting to still be hauling hoses are routinely surprised. The hose stays coiled. The plants grow. If you have been following this and something is connecting for you, if you are looking at your garden debris pile differently right now, please leave me a comment and tell me where you are in this. Are you just hearing about this for the first time, or have you been trying hugelkultur and want to compare notes? I read every comment that comes in genuinely, and those conversations shape what I explore next. We are a small enough community here that I can still do that, and I do not want that to change. The second thing buried wood does is feed the soil, not in the aggressive boom and bust way that a bag of synthetic fertilizer feeds it, but slowly, reliably, across a timeline measured in decades. Hardwood logs, oak, maple, beech can take 15 to 20 years to fully decompose. And during every year of that process, the microbial breakdown of the wood releases nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, and trace minerals into the surrounding soil at a rate that roughly tracks the metabolic needs of the plants growing above. There is no spring flush followed by midsummer starvation. There is no fertilizer burn. There is a slow, patient release synchronized with the seasons and the biology of the mound itself. Long-term soil tests from established hugelkultur beds consistently show higher nitrogen and phosphorus levels than the same surrounding ground, even after a decade of harvesting without any added amendment. The wood is not depleted, it is converting. What drives that conversion is a community of organisms that the buried wood assembles and feeds over time. Fungi colonize the logs within the first season, weaving mycelial networks through the wood fibers and extending outward into the surrounding soil. Those networks become highways for mineral exchange, moving phosphorus from deep in the mound up to the surface roots, shuttling carbon from decomposing wood out to plants that need it. Bacteria follow, working on the more accessible compounds the fungi expose. Earthworms tunnel through the softening wood, mixing it with soil and leaving behind castings concentrated in plant-available nutrients. Each organism in this community works at its own pace, but the combined effect across years is a fertility engine that requires no external inputs and grows more productive as the mound ages. Subscribe if you want to follow this further, because there is an entire world of soil biology behind what I just described, and I find it endlessly worth digging into. I am not saying that to be promotional. I am saying it because this subject genuinely holds my attention, and if it holds yours too, I think you will want to be here for where it goes. The third thing buried wood does is heat the soil, and this is the quality that made Holzer's alpine lemons possible. Microbial decomposition is an exothermic process. Every bacterium and every fungal strand consuming cellulose and lignin in the core of the mound releases heat as a metabolic byproduct. In a well-built mound with a dense buried wood core, that heat production is not negligible. Soil temperature measurements taken directly above active decomposition zones in hugelkultur beds frequently show readings several degrees warmer than the surrounding flat ground, even in sub-freezing ambient air. That temperature difference sounds modest until you consider what it means for a plant. Seeds germinate earlier in spring when soil is 3 degrees warmer than baseline. Frost events that kill seedlings on bare flat ground pass over a mound without damage, the cold air unable to penetrate a surface insulated from below by biological heat. Autumn growing seasons extend by weeks as the mound retains summer warmth long after neighboring gardens have shut down. Holzer's citrus trees did not survive Austrian winters because of microclimate tricks or greenhouse protection. They survived because the ground beneath them was metabolically warm. Now, how to actually build one of these? The foundation of every hugelkultur mound is the same, regardless of scale. The oldest, most rotten wood you can find, oak and maple, are ideal because their slow decomposition rate means decades of slow-release fertility. Fresh-cut green wood works but requires more nitrogen to balance the microbial demand. Never use black walnut, cedar, or any treated lumber. These release compounds that are genuinely toxic to soil biology. The plants above it start directly on top of existing ground. No need to remove the grass. The grass itself will decompose and add to the fertility stack. The largest logs first, filling every gap with smaller branches, then twigs, then the finest woody material you have. Pack it tightly. Air pockets left unfilled become voids that cause the mound to sink unevenly as decomposition proceeds. The step that most first-time builders skip, and the one that causes the yellow leaf disappointment that gives hugelkultur a bad reputation among people who tried it once and quit, is the nitrogen layer. Rotting wood is carbon-rich. The microbes breaking it down need nitrogen in proportion to that carbon, and if you do not supply it externally, they will take it from your plants. The result is nitrogen-locked seedlings that turn pale and stall while the wood slowly steals what they needed. The fix is simple. Before you cap the mound with topsoil, pack every visible crevice with nitrogen-rich material. Grass, clippings, fresh manure, finished compost, even diluted urine if you have nothing else. This feeds the microbial engine at the right ratio from the beginning and keeps the nitrogen available for your plants, rather than consumed by the wood. And once that layer is in, add a foot of good topsoil and a layer of mulch. Water it thoroughly in the first season. After that, the mound manages its own moisture. The first year of a hugelkultur mound is the humblest. And the wood is still settling, the microbial community is still establishing, and the nitrogen balance can be erratic if the layering was uneven. Plant nitrogen-fixing species that first year: beans, peas, clover, which contribute to the soil while tolerating imperfect conditions. By the second year, the mound has stabilized and the returns begin to shift. By the third year, most gardeners report yields that consistently outperform their flatbeds while requiring noticeably less water and no added fertility. The mound does not peak and then decline. It improves. The wood becomes richer in biology the older and more decomposed it gets. A 20-year-old mound is more productive than a 5-year-old mound in the same location with the same planting. That trajectory is the opposite of almost every other garden input, which depletes and requires replacement. Buried wood gets better as it ages, and the garden above it gets better with it. The thing about this technique that I find most affecting is the scale of what most of us are discarding without a second thought every single autumn. Those branches piled at the curb. That storm debris stacked by the fence, every piece of woody material we send to the landfill or the bonfire is a decade or two of slow water storage, slow fertility, and biological heat that we decided had no value. Holzer's farm was not built on exceptional soil or exceptional climate. It was built on the deliberate decision to treat dead wood as a resource rather than a problem. That decision is available to any gardener with a yard, a shovel, and an hour to spend. If this changed how you are thinking about the brush pile at the edge of your property, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment and tell me whether you are planning to build your first mound this season or whether you have already built one and want to share what year you are in and how it is performing. Those reports from people further along in the process are some of the most useful things in this comment section. And I think everyone reading them benefits. And if someone in your life has been talking about water conservation or soil fertility and hasn't heard of this yet, share it with them. This is the kind of idea that changes what a person does the next time they walk past a pile of dead branches. I will see you in the next one.